This is the lecture on geologic time. Some historical notes. In 1644, the Archbishop of Ireland, James Ussher, calculated the Earth's creation as being on October 23rd, 4004 BC. He did it by adding up the ages of the prophets in the Old Testament of the Bible. So that came out to about 6,000 years. The idea of a 6,000-year-old Earth was widely believed for centuries. Catastrophism was gradually adopted as a way to incorporate new scientific developments, but still hanging on to a supernatural creation of the Earth. So the Earth was created by supernatural divine forces. The landscape was developed by catastrophes, ending with the Great Flood. In the late 1700s, modern geology began with a different idea called the principle of uniformitarianism. It's a fundamental principle of geology. It's sometimes called uniformity for short. And the popular phrase is, the present is the key to the past, meaning that geological processes operate today as they did in the past. And the man credited with this idea is James Hutton from Scotland. Now, one of the promoters of catastrophism in Europe was Abraham Werner of Germany. And he invoked supernatural creation of the Earth, and he said the Earth's rocks and landforms were all created after settling after the Great Flood, which implied that all of the Earth's rocks were sedimentary. James Hutton didn't believe all rocks on Earth were sedimentary. On his farm, he saw a granite dike in an outcrop, and he reasoned that it must have flowed into place from a molten state, making it igneous, and all the other folded rocks were deformed, and that was later called metamorphic. So uniformitarianism, the present is the key to the past. Hutton assumed that Earth processes had always operated in the past as they do today. Followers of James Hutton argued that no supernatural creation was even needed, and therefore the Earth had to be much older than the 6,000 years to explain its diversity of landforms. So James Hutton reasoned that given enough time, a river and flowing water could wear down the grandest mountain. He published a book or a paper called Theory of the Earth in the late 1700s. This is a historical painting of James Hutton. And again, the present is the key to the past is his catchphrase for the theory of uniformitarianism. Near James Hutton's home in Scotland, near the coast, is this famous place called Sicker Point. As you can see, it's made up of layers of sedimentary rock that have been severely folded. In fact, here, the folds are almost vertical. And there's evidence of erosion as well. So rocks were originally horizontally deposited, and then they were uplifted and folded, and then they were eroded, and then younger layers were deposited on top of that. And this is called an angular unconformity. Some more historical notes. One of James Hutton's students, Charles Lyell, taught geology using his principles. And one of Lyell's geology students was a young Charles Darwin. So this is a picture of Charles Darwin. You've probably seen pictures of him as an old man with a long beard. This is what he looked like. He had red hair. So the age of the Earth was a subject of debate during the 1800s. Catastrophism eventually lost favor to uniformitarianism by the early 1800s as geology became accepted as a modern science. Stratigraphy is a branch of geology, and it established the concepts of relative age dating, which is based on common sense, where one could determine which layer or geological event was earlier or later, but without mathematical precision. In other words, nobody knew how long ago in years these events happened. In science, the branches that can come up with calculations tend to dominate the discussion. So Lord Kelvin, who was Sir William Thomson, was a mathematical physicist. And in 1862, he estimated the heat transfer. He discovered a curve called the geothermal gradient. As you go down deeper into the Earth gets hotter. So he calculated the Earth's age to be between 20 and 100 million years old, based upon how fast the heat was escaping from the Earth. Now, his theory had an underlying assumption that the only source of heat was the original heat of the Earth's creation. Geologists and paleontologists argued for a much older Earth, but could not refute the age calculation. Radioactive decay, which was discovered near the end of the 19th century, accounted for an additional source of interior heat not known to Lord Kelvin. So his underlying assumptions were proven wrong, allowing for an older Earth, using radiometric age dating methods developed by Arthur Holmes. Now I'm going to switch over to an animation showing how Kelvin's age calculation was done. Okay, here's an animation showing how Lord Kelvin determined the age of the Earth. There's a temperature of the Earth's surface. Kelvin assumed that the Earth was equally hot from the center to the surface when it formed, uniformly hot. This is the temperature of the Earth's center. So increasing temperature is to the right. So this is also a timeline going from the formation of the Earth to the present day. So let's turn the animation on. Now the temperature of the Earth's surface is much lower today. So this is known as the geothermal gradient. It's a curve showing how the temperature of the Earth increases as you go toward the center. So this is the present temperature of the Earth's surface. Lord Kelvin estimated the age of the Earth by calculating the time required for the temperature curve to change from the assumed temperature gradient when the Earth formed to the present day gradient inferred from the temperature of measurements in deep mines. Kelvin's estimated age of 20 to 40 million years is much less than the actual age because he did not know about radioactive decay, which heats the Earth's interior so that billions of years must pass to account for the changing temperature gradient curves. Okay, so he didn't know about radioactivity, but neither did anybody else. So his arguments stood for many decades. Let's talk about relative dating. This is an older principle, placing rocks and events in sequence, and there are some basic rules of stratigraphy. Common sense. Law of superposition. The oldest rocks are on the bottom, and the younger rocks are found on top. The principle of original horizontality. Sediment is deposited horizontally because it responds to gravity. The principle of cross-cutting relationships. A younger feature cuts through an older feature. Superposition is well illustrated by the strata, the layered sedimentary rocks in the Grand Canyon. Okay, here's a photograph of the Grand Canyon. Here's an overlay with some color coding and the different formations. So these layers are horizontal. They haven't been turned over or anything. And each of these has a name. So the deeper you go into the Grand Canyon, the further back in time you're going, and the older these rocks are. So as we move forward in time, we have the Supai group here. This is the sandstone. We have the Hermit Shale. It's a talus pile because it erodes more easily than sandstone. Here's a Coconino sandstone. Again, it's a steep because it's more resistant to erosion. The Turawap Formation, which is made of shales. And then we have the Kaibab limestone, which is geologically the youngest on top. So this demonstrates the law of superposition. The layers on the bottom were deposited earlier than the layers on the top. Here's the principle of cross-cutting relationships. This is a schematic block diagram of a landscape, and what we see at present is what's on the surface. Now we look at the cutaway view. This is called a cross-sectional view, and we see horizontal layers, we see a series of faults, and we see a series of dikes. These are cross-cutting formations. Now it says that whatever cuts across is geologically younger than what is being cut. So the sedimentary rocks must have been deposited first. So the dike here is younger. Now we have a series of dikes. We have two dikes here, and we have an igneous intrusion called sill, which works its way between the bedding planes of the sedimentary rock. And we can see that one cuts across another. So if we look at these, we have two dikes and we have two sills. So using logic, we could figure out which one happened first, which one is cut across the most. Okay, so it's probably this dike is older than this one, and this is the third one, and this one cuts across both of these. So these two must have pre-existed. But this diagram is decoded in a series of steps later on. Principles and rules of inclusions. One rock contained within another. Rock containing the inclusions is younger. That means the inclusions are made of pieces of a rock that was older. Unconformities. An unconformity is a break in the rock record. It's an interruption of deposition. There are types of unconformities. The angular unconformity involves tilted rocks that are overlain by flat-lying rocks. That was the famous Sicker Point in Scotland near James Hutton's home. And then we have the disconformity, where strata on either side are parallel. Here's a series of diagrams. Geologists often have to work backwards. This is the current landscape. Okay, so to reconstruct what happened here, we see layers that have been tilted because there's an intrusion from below. We see a period of erosion. This irregular line is rocks being eroded, and then newer sedimentary rocks being deposited on top of that. So we know the age and the sequence, but we also have to assume that these layers were once horizontal before they were folded. So we start with block A, so we account for the sedimentary layers before the folding. So we see they're all horizontal. Then we account for the folding. We have the intrusion coming from below. It folds it up into an anticline. Then we have a period of erosion, and we have, looks like a plunging anticline because we have a series of V's here. And we see the dotted line here indicating where the fold used to be, but it's now been eroded. And then the sea invaded the land again and deposited these flat-lying layers overhead. So this erosion surface is an angular unconformity because the rocks have been folded. Here's another sequence. This is what we see today. This one was caused by the erosion of igneous rocks. So in diagram A, we have igneous rock that's intruding but not going through this older schist, this pink orange looking rock here. It's got all these wavy lines in it, so I'm guessing this is a metamorphic rock. So the older pink schist is intruded below by a younger, well, let's call this gabbro. It's because it's intrusive, it's not volcanic, and it breaks off pieces of the schist. Okay, so the pieces of the schist are now inclusions in the younger igneous rock. Then this is exposed to erosion at the surface, and we see that the top of the schist has been worn away, and the top of the gabbro has been worn away. So there are pieces of gabbro that have been broken into pieces by the weathering and erosion process. Then we have diagram C, where layers of younger sedimentary rocks have been deposited over it, and these pieces of weathered fragments of the metamorphic rock and igneous rock are now found inside as inclusions. So weathering and erosion wears away both the schist and the gabbro in block B, producing a nonconformity and broken pieces of gabbro. And finally, block C, the younger sedimentary rocks have incorporated inclusions of the broken gabbro as seen in the expanded photo of the rock sample. Okay, so these are larger single diagrams of what's happened. Okay, so we have the intrusive igneous rock breaking off pieces of the older schist, so these are inclusions. Diagram B, under weathering and erosion, the schist has been weathered away. The igneous rock is a little bit more resistant, but it has weathered into broken pieces of gabbro. Block C, the younger sedimentary rock layers have been deposited, so these pieces of broken gabbro have been now included as inclusions. And this is a close-up of the rock containing the inclusion. We have types of unconformities. We have a nonconformity where the metamorphic or igneous rock below, and then we have younger sedimentary rocks above, and there's an animation associated with this. Okay, we have a block diagram. We have flat-lying sedimentary layers. We have the sill. This is pretty similar to the static diagram, but it's drawn a little bit differently. Okay, this dike actually can be seen on the surface. So we have a fault here. We have another fault here. We have a dike here. We have a batholith, which is an igneous intrusion. So we're going to turn on the animation. This is what we had first. We first had to deposit flat-lying sedimentary layers of rock. Okay, then we have a fault. This is a reverse fault. And on this side, this is a normal fault. Then we have an intrusion. Then we have dike A, which becomes a sill. Then we have dike B. Okay, so this is the entire sequence shown as an animation. Okay, so we have active volcanoes fed by this dike. Now let's see the additional events in chapter 2 of this animation. Actually, this is it looks like a repeat of the previous diagram. Okay, this one shows each step. Let's start that again. Alright. Layers of sediment are deposited from bottom to top. So this one shows it in steps. Okay. Second step. A fault cuts across the rock layers. This is a reverse fault. Renewed deposition of sediment layers. Next event. Another fault, a normal fault, cuts across the rock layers. Magma intrusion. So the magma cuts across the fault so that we know the fault occurred before the intrusion. So the magma intrudes across sedimentary layers and the fault. Next event. We have a magma intrusion. This is a dike which becomes a sill. Then we have another dike, and this feeds the volcanoes at the surface. Okay, so this is a step-by-step animation showing you all the steps that are in there. You can replay this part of the video to do the animation again. So we'll go back to the slides. This shows the Grand Canyon in greater detail, and in addition to the flat-lying sedimentary layers, we see a series of unconformities classified as different types. We have disconformities, we have an angular unconformity. So this is an angular unconformity because these rocks had been tilted, and then this is an erosional surface. We have a disconformity here because these are all sedimentary rocks, and the period of erosion produced this irregular erosion line. Erosion never coincides with the smooth line that we see. Those are called contacts, and contacts are basically interruptions in deposition, whereas an unconformity or disconformity is a period of erosion. So they never coincide with each other. And we see at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, we see some very old metamorphic rocks, probably a schist, and then we see intrusions of granite that came after that. So the Vishnu schist is almost 1 billion years old at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So here is what the Grand Canyon looks like. The reason the canyon is grand is it's not produced just strictly by erosion of the Colorado River. It's also the geologic uplift that makes the canyon deeper than it otherwise normal would be if it were just river erosion. Here's Zion Canyon. another scenic place, national park, and Bryce Canyon. Okay, Bryce Canyon has a distinctive look. These are largely sandstones. Now, it turns out these three national parks are all related by different events, but they have a different overlap in geologic time. This is called the stratigraphic correlation between the three locations. So it turns out that the Grand Canyon represents older rocks going all the way back to the Precambrian. And then as you move north to Zion National Park, these rocks are during the Triassic and Jurassic, during the time of the dinosaurs. And Bryce Canyon is geologically the youngest. Okay, so the oldest rocks found here are during the Jurassic period, goes to the end of the dinosaur age and into the age of mammals. So all of these have formations that are correlated. So the Carmel Formation is found in the Navajo Sandstone. These two formations are found in both Zion and Bryce. And we have the Kaibab Limestone found in both Zion and Grand Canyon. And this is a map showing where they are. Grand Canyon is the furthest south. Zion is in Utah, and Bryce is in the eastern part of Utah. Here's a sequence of geological events. Geologists work backwards to reconstruct what is now present. So we have this diagram here. So these are the steps. Sedimentary rocks originally deposited as flat horizontal layers of strata. That's step one. And we have to account for the folding. Igneous intrusion from below uplifted and folded the strata into an anticline. That's upfold. Diagram C, differential erosion created a series of hogbacks and valleys. So this dotted line indicates the geometry of the original rocks before erosion. After erosion, the more resistant rocks like limestone and sandstone form ridges, and we have the valleys formed from the more easily eroded shales. And then finally, we have deposition of younger sedimentary rock over the erosion surface, this jagged surface. This is called an angular unconformity. Okay, so these are larger diagrams of the same steps. Horizontal deposition, and these are labeled. Okay, so the advantage of a larger diagram is each of these is labeled with a sequence number. So we see 1 occurred first, then 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then 1 through 5 has been folded and uplifted. Then we have erosion, and we see that erosion has removed most of 5, 4, 3, and 2, but not 1. 1 is still intact. And then we have the deposition, and we see a number missing here. Number 6 is missing. So 6 must have existed. This is not a mistake in the sequence. 6 must have existed, but has since been eroded. And we have 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so we have another animation coming up. Okay, we're going to look at different kinds of unconformities in an animated form. So we're going to look first at a nonconformity, or an angular unconformity. All right, deposition of horizontal layers, folding and uplifting, erosion. Subsidence means that it sinks, and then layers of newer sedimentary rock on top. So this is the angular unconformity because of the folding. Now let's look at a nonconformity. Okay, we have metamorphic and igneous rocks and sedimentary rocks above. Okay, erosion has removed the sedimentary rocks and part of the top of the metamorphic rock. Okay, so this produces pieces that have been broken, and then we have the deposition of younger sedimentary layers on top, and this is where the inclusions come from. The weathering and erosion produce broken pieces of the older metamorphic and igneous rock. This is an animated version of the diagram, the static diagram that was seen earlier. Now we're going to look at a disconformity. We have deposition of horizontal layers. We have erosion, Some of the layers are completely gone, and then we have the deposition of newer layers. So everything's horizontal, but this is called a disconformity because this is all sedimentary rocks that have not been folded. Now we go back to the slides. Okay, this is a more complex looking. Well, maybe it's not that complex, but everything's labeled here, and this is the complete sequence. These diagrams are a little bit small, but this will be reproduced as a PowerPoint PDF file, so you'll be able to read these. So each of these has been broken up into steps, and all the steps have been accounted for. Okay, so we have layers A, B, C, and E were deposited in that order. Bed D is a sill, a concordant igneous intrusion. Evidence indicates that sill D is younger than beds C and E. So C and E are inclusions found in D. So we know that D had to be younger because these pieces of C and E had to be there first. Okay, that accounts for the unusual lettering here. Okay, we go from C to E because D is actually younger, so it's given this lettering. Okay, following the intrusion of sill D, the intrusion of dike F occurred. So the sill was here first, and then F cuts across. So that is geologically younger. Because the dike cuts through beds A through E, it must be younger than all of them. Principle of cross-cutting relationships. The cutter is younger than the cuttee, whatever has been cut. Next, the rocks were tilted and eroded. The tilting happened first because the upturned bed ends of the strata have been eroded. Okay, so this has been eroded. Followed by further deposition producing an angular unconformity. Finally, the irregular surface and the stream valley indicate that another gap in the rock record has been produced by erosion. Okay, so we have layer G, H, I, J, and K deposited after the erosion. And then we have beds G, H, I, J, and K here. Again, using the law of superposition. Although the lava flow, which is bed H, is not a sedimentary rock layer, it is a surface deposited layer, and thus the superposition may be applied. So this was a lava flow that flowed laterally across the surface, kind of acting like a sedimentary rock, but it's of course igneous. And this is the final diagram. So we have layers that were deposited horizontally, then a dike intruded, and then it was folded, then it was eroded, and then deposition. The correlation of rock layers is a very useful thing in stratigraphy. Matching rocks of similar age in different regions, it often relies upon fossils. Correlation, stratigraphic correlation, is used extensively by the oil companies, and if they find oil in one place, they look for a similar geology, and they look for matching rock layers, and they look for the same fossils, and that's a useful economic use of stratigraphy. Now we'll talk about fossils, the evidence of past life. The remains or trace of prehistoric life. When I was learning geology, I was taught that a good cutoff age for a fossil is something like 8,000 or 10,000 years, basically going back to the last ice age. So we have different types of fossils. The rarest kind of fossil is actual preservation, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But most of the time, only traces of fossils or replacement material resembling the original plant or animal are left behind. So petrified are fossils that have actually been replaced by minerals and turned into rock. So we've heard of petrified wood formed by replacement. The cell material is removed and replaced with mineral matter. Petrified wood is also a type of replacement. We have a mold, where the shell or other structure is buried and then dissolved by underground water. So we just see the shape of the of the fossil. Or we have a cast, where the hollow place of a mold is filled with mineral matter. This is petrified wood. It's a rock containing replacement mineral, chalcedony. It's a silica mineral from the original wood. The replacement is so exact that even under a microscope, it still looks like a plant. So when you look at the silica, it resembles plant cells. These are natural casts of shelled invertebrates. Okay, this is a type of fossil called an ammonite. It's looks somewhat similar to the pearly chambered nautilus of today, but ammonites went extinct when the dinosaurs went extinct. We have other kinds of fossils. Carbonization is organic matter that becomes a thin residue of carbon. We have impression, where the replica of the fossil's surface is preserved in fine-grained sediment. And we have preservation in amber, the hardened resin of ancient trees surrounding an organism. So, in some ways, the amber is a fossil, but the insect or whatever inside is actually its original material, so it is also actual preservation. So here's a carbon imprint fossil of a bee. This is a fossilized fish. Now I'll talk about the rarest type of fossil called actual preservation, where any combination of the original bones, original organic material, skin, or soft tissues. Woolly mammoths and mastodons preserved from the last ice age, especially in the permafrost areas such as Siberia that never really thawed out since the last ice age. Every few years or so they find another of these creatures frozen from the last ice age. Some have been so perfectly preserved that all of their fur and skin is intact. In fact, one of the first ones found almost a century ago looked so impressive. It looked like it had died the day before. And when they examined it, they found that its last meal of moss had been undigested for all those thousands of years. Another type of actual preservation is being preserved in asphalt. There are oil seeps, some containing a heavy oil and tar, and that's a natural animal trap because it's at the bottom of a watering hole. It's unseen, and when the animals go there to drink water, they get stuck, and that attracts predators, and the predators jump in to get a free meal, and then they themselves get stuck. So the La Brea tar pits in the Los Angeles area is a good example. There are thousands of creatures found there. Fossils, that is. Amber is the fossilized tree sap, which may contain trapped preserved insects. In fact, there was even an early bird-like dinosaur that was found recently trapped in amber. Okay, here is the amber, and here's the insect, perfectly preserved. The whole science fiction premise of the Jurassic Park movies was that they were able to extract intact DNA from mosquitoes that bit dinosaurs. And the science fiction part was actually making the DNA work. I mean, in reality, the DNA is so degraded that they could never actually do what they did in the movies. Here is actual preservation. This is Yucca, the baby mammoth, found frozen after 39,000 years. Okay, so it's got all its skin and a lot of its fur still preserved in ice. This is what the fossils look like in the La Brea tar pits. All of these are extinct animals from many, many thousands of years ago. These are the reconstructed fossils. Those woolly mammoths and other large creatures. Ice Age mammals, basically. Then there are trace fossils. Indirect evidence. We have tracks, dinosaur tracks or tracks of smaller creatures. There are burrows made by worms. Coprolites, fossilized dung and stomach contents, especially from large creatures like dinosaurs. Gastroliths. Dinosaurs, like birds, had a gizzard-like organ where they swallowed stones to help grind up the food they ate. This is especially true for dinosaurs. So these stones look polished, so they know that these are gastroliths. Here's a dinosaur footprint. The three-toed print indicates it's a carnivorous dinosaur because it's got a bird-like foot. Less than 2% of everything that lived ever ended up in the fossil record. Also, out of that 2%, there's an unequal representation of what actually lived at that time. So, fossilization is a rare set of circumstances that need to be met. The average creature that dies doesn't end up in the fossil record. Scavengers will consume the body, and then the bones will weather and turn into dust. But rapid burial, especially in and around water, is one condition favoring preservation, and having hard parts to leave a trace is another. So the fossil record covers only the last 540 million years of the Earth's history. So more than 4 billion years of the Earth's history doesn't have much of any representation. The fossils found before the Cambrian period, the Precambrian, are almost all soft-bodied animals or microbes. And preserving soft-bodied animals is especially rare. There's a principle of faunal succession where fossils succeed one another in a definite and determinable order. Generally, there's an increase in complexity from the oldest rocks to the youngest rocks. And when animals and plants go extinct, they never reappear again in the fossil record. Now, this has a logical explanation. You can reproduce today possibly an extinct creature by regenerating its DNA, but you can't reproduce the conditions of the Earth that existed when that creature first was alive. So that's one of the reasons why you can't bring extinct species back. They're not likely to survive even if you could do it. So faunal succession or fossil succession was an old idea, more than 200 years old. This is a type of fossil correlation, and this is called index fossils. Index fossils are useful for telling the age. There are different kinds of index fossils, and the ones that are most useful have what's called a narrow stratigraphic range. That is, they existed for a fairly short period of geological time. Okay, the short geological time means that you can age something more precisely. For example, this trilobite has a fairly short stratigraphic range, whereas this brachiopod existed for a long time and has a large stratigraphic range. So this dinosaur here has a short stratigraphic range. This maple leaf does too. Okay, so if we find in rock unit A these 5 fossils, in rock unit B these 5 fossils, if you find them all in the same rock, they could have only coexisted by overlapping their stratigraphic ranges. So this fern leaf, this fern didn't exist until this time. It's found in the same formation as this trilobite, and the trilobite became extinct at this time. So this narrows the stratigraphic range to this light blue band here. In rock A, all of these fossils are found in the same rock, so they must have coexisted. This dinosaur became extinct at the end of this time, but this maple leaf, this maple tree, didn't evolve until this time. So if you find them both, this is the narrow span of time that covers the stratigraphic ranges of every fossil that's been found. So the short stratigraphic range makes these the most useful index fossils. This trilobite, this dinosaur, and this maple. So those are called index fossils. The other feature that index fossils need to have is a widespread geographic range. It doesn't do you much good if they only exist in one little pocket of the world. The state fossil of Illinois is called the Tully monster, and the Tully monster is extremely rare. It's found only in Illinois. It's not found anywhere else. The chances of it being found was like 1 in a million, but somehow uh, the fossil was found. But they know very little about it because it doesn't resemble anything that came before it, and it left no descendants. Now we look at radiometric age dating, which is a way to provide mathematical precision to geologic ages. And it wasn't until radioactivity was accidentally discovered. Henri Becquerel from France discovered radioactivity. He was investigating naturally occurring fluorescent minerals, that is, minerals that gave off fluorescence, to study the property of X-rays. So the atom has particles inside the center. Protons and neutrons have the same mass and about the same size, except the protons have a positive electrical charge, whereas neutrons have no charge. So neutrons and protons exist in the center of the atom. Orbiting the nucleus at the speed of light are electrons, which are negatively charged particles, much smaller, about 1/1800th the mass. The atomic number is the identity of the atom. That's done by counting the number of protons. The mass number is the protons added to the neutrons. An isotope is a variant of the same parent atom. Since the identity is determined by the number of protons, an isotope will have a different number of neutrons, and therefore a different mass number. So we've heard of carbon-14. Carbon-14 differs from regular carbon, carbon-12, in that carbon-14 has 2 extra neutrons. They're both carbon because they both have 6 protons. Radioactivity is the spontaneous breaking apart or decay of the atomic nuclei. That is, the nucleus disintegrates. And this usually means that the neutrons decay. So we have a parent that is an unstable isotope, and we have daughter products, which are isotopes formed from the decay of a parent. So decay doesn't always proceed in one smooth fashion. It proceeds in a series of steps, and then we have what's called a stable daughter product at the end. There are 3 types of radioactive decay. Alpha emission, where these particles are positively charged. It looks somewhat like helium atoms, but they're charged. Beta emission are energetic electrons, and then we have electron capture, where the protons may capture a beta particle, and then the proton and the beta particle neutralize each other, and then it ends up being an extra neutron. So here's a diagram showing each of these types of radioactive decay. Okay, so an alpha particle looks like this. 2 protons, 2 neutrons. A beta particle looks like this, an energetic electron. This little thing here is an electron. And we have electron capture. So an electron is caught in this unstable nucleus, and it neutralizes one of the protons, and that increases the number of neutrons. Radiometric dating is based upon the decay rate, which follows a curve called the half-life. And that means a fixed amount of time for 1/2 of the radioactive nuclei to decay. This requires a closed system where there's no interference with forces from outside. Cross-checks are used for accuracy. Very often radiometric age dating is cross-referenced with the stratigraphy and fossils. It's a complex procedure. The accuracy of measuring the parent versus daughter, that's called the parent-to-daughter ratio, is important, and it yields numerical dates. So radiometric age dating has been around for more than 100 years. This is the mathematical curve showing how radioactive decay works. Okay, so we have a percentage from 0 to 100. So when we start, we're at time 0, and this is the number of half-lives. Okay, here the number of half-lives isn't defined in terms of years or whatever time, but this is to illustrate the principle. And the color coding here shows that the parent's isotope, these are blue dots, the daughter isotopes are red dots. Okay, so when we start, we have all blue dots, all parent, so 100%. So when we get down to 1 half-life, we go from 100% to 50. Okay, and now we have 50 parent and 50 daughter. When we go another half-life, we have half of what was remaining, so it goes from 50 to 25. Okay, and then we look at the count, and now we have 25 blue dots of parent and 75 dots of daughter. Okay, another half-life. Half of 25 is 12 and a half. So at the end of 3 half-lives, we have 12 and a half. So we'll count it as 13 atoms and 87 atoms of daughter product. Okay, we go another half-life. Half of 12 and a half is 6 1/4. So we have 6 atoms of parent, 94 atoms of daughter product. So this curve gets closer and closer to 0, and when you have this many half-lives going by, you have less accurate measurements. So now we're going to look at an animation. Hopefully that will illustrate how radioactive decay works. Okay, here we go. Alright, we have the proportion of parent and daughter atoms. Okay, again we have the same color coding. Actually here the color is reversed. The parent is red and the daughter is blue. Okay, so we have millions of atoms in this chart here, and this is a time chart. Okay, so turn the animation on. Okay, half of the parent atoms decay to form daughter atoms. Okay, so we have a 4-month half-life. Animate again. So after 8 months, that's a second half-life. Okay, and after 12 months, that's 3 half-lives. Okay, now we see the proportion. Okay, we have now 56 daughter, 8 parent. Dating sedimentary strata using radiometric dating. So we use a combination of stratigraphy, and if we have something that we can measure, radiometric dating works best in igneous rocks because they contain the isotopes. So fortunately, there's an igneous dike that can be radiometrically age dated at 66 million years. Okay, so this looks like a canyon, and the dike here gives us an age that can be measured. Carbon-14 dating. Rarely used by geologists because it has a very short half-life, less than 6,000 years, 5,730 years. It's used to date very recent events. Here's how it works. Carbon-14 decays naturally into regular carbon-12. So carbon-14 is produced in the upper atmosphere. It's incorporated in carbon dioxide, is absorbed by living matter. Now when a creature dies, the amount of carbon-14 is fixed at the time of death, and it can only decay or decrease over time. Radiometric dating using carbon-14 is useful for anthropologists, archaeologists, historians, and geologists who study very recent Earth history. For example, if you're studying the Ice Age. Carbon-14 beyond 40,000 years yields less accurate results because there's not much left to measure after that many half-lives. So carbon-14 is not suitable for age dating most rocks because its short half-life is not accurate beyond 40,000 years. Instead, geologists who are used to dealing with millions or billions of years use the following radioactive parent and daughter. Okay, so ordinary common uranium U-238 decays to the stable daughter product lead-206, and it has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, which is good because it matches the age of the Earth, just one half-life. Uranium-235, which is bomb-grade uranium, decays to lead-207, it has a half-life of 713 million years. Thorium and lead has a half-life that's about the age of the universe, 14.1 billion years. Rubidium strontium has a half-life of 47 billion years. Potassium argon, 1.3 billion years. So radioactive decay starts out with a parent isotope, U-238, which spontaneously decays at a fixed rate, that's called a half-life, into a series of lighter elements, ending with a stable isotope, daughter isotope, lead-206. Okay, so all these other ones have a very short half-life. Okay, but to go from uranium to the final daughter product takes 4.5 billion years half-life. The geologic timescale divides geologic history into units. It was originally created using relative dates. There are subdivisions of geologic time. The eon is the greatest expanse of time. There have been 4 eons in the Earth's history. The Phanerozoic, meaning the eon of visible life, is the most recent eon. We have, further back, we have the Proterozoic, and we have the Archean, and we have the Hadean. The Hadean covers the part of the Earth where the history was lost because the oldest rocks were destroyed. Let's talk about the magnitude of geologic time. How long is 4.6 billion years? That's the accepted age of the Earth. If you counted one number per second 24/7, it would take 150 years to reach 4.6 billion. If you compress Earth's 4.6 billion year history into the equivalent of a single year, this would be the calendar of events. So the Earth forms on January 1st. The Earth's oldest rocks form in the middle of March. In May, the first living things, all microbes, appear in the oceans. And it's not till late November that land plants and animals appear. December 1st through 4th, we have the giant seed fern swamps, which become future coal. December 15th through the 26th is the reign of the dinosaurs. On December 27th, mammals inherit the Earth because the dinosaurs perished on December 26th. December 31st, early humans appear. And now we're going on the clock. December 31st at 11:58 and 15 seconds, that's less than 2 minutes before midnight, is the end of the most recent ice age. The Roman Empire existed all of 5 seconds on December 31st. And James Hutton founded modern geology 1 second before midnight. Okay, so the Archean is the lost era of Earth's history from 4.6 billion years to maybe 3.8. And then that's a Hadean. So the Archean is in the rock record. The Hadean is the oldest eon. The era is a subdivision of an eon. So we have with the fossil record and hard parts, the era is used. Okay, so we have the Paleozoic era. Okay, so these three are within the Phanerozoic eon. Paleozoic is the era, the age of invertebrates. So that means the era of ancient life. The Mesozoic, the era of middle life, is also known as the age of reptiles, or the age of dinosaurs. The Cenozoic era is the era of recent life, that's known as the age of mammals. Eras are subdivided into periods. Periods are subdivided into epochs. So within the age of mammals, we have the Pleistocene epoch, a shorter period of time, about the last most recent 2 million years. Okay, here is a color-coded geologic time scale. This one shows the full Earth history, 4.6 million years. The Hadean is the area of lost Earth history, 700 million years missing in the rock record. The Archean begins 3.8, ends at 2.5 billion years. And then we have the Proterozoic from 2.5 billion to the dawn of the Cambrian. So collectively, all of these are called the Precambrian, because we know very little, about 88% of Earth's history. The fossil record and hard parts begins with the Paleozoic. So the Phanerozoic is what we know the most about. So the Phanerozoic here has been expanded into it's been magnified into this scale. Okay, so the Precambrian is lumped together. So we have Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, and Permian. That's the Paleozoic. The Mesozoic includes Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. Cenozoic has Tertiary and Quaternary, and then we have smaller units of time because we have a more detailed fossil record. So these go from Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, Pliocene, Pleistocene. Holocene is the era of present-day Earth. Difficulties in dating the timescale. Not all rocks are datable. Sedimentary ages are rarely reliable because we don't have the isotopes in sedimentary rock. Materials are often used to bracket events and arrive at ages. Not all rocks, let's see. Okay, so we are at the end of this chapter, and the next one will deal with Earth history.